Okay, we have just hit 3 minutes past, so let's get started. So yeah, it just falls to me to welcome everybody to GW4 Open Research Week 2023. This is a series of kind of events, seminars, workshops on all different aspects of open research. This particular talk is going to be about the UKRN Open Research Primers, which Neil will be telling you all about. One thing before we get started, there is still time to register for other Open Research Week events. I've just popped a link in the chat to the full programme, so yeah, do check that out. Okay, over to you, Neil.
That was briefer than I was expecting, Zasha. Sorry about that. Hello. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. As I said, I'm Neil Jacobs. I work for the UK Reproducibility Network, and for those of you who don't know, the UK Reproducibility Network is a collaboration, a network, a national network across the United Kingdom of researchers and of institutions and of funders and publishers, all of whom share a mission to improve research quality, research practice, research rigor, reproducibility, those sorts of things. And openness and transparency is one of the ways in which we do that. So we're very interested in open and transparent research, and the ethos of the UK Reproducibility Network is to enable collaboration. There's quite enough competition in the sector at the moment, so we're aiming to be one kind of an antidote to that. So we're aiming to be a platform on which researchers and institutions and other stakeholders can collaborate. So that's a little bit of context for me and for some of the and for the work that I'm going to talk about today. Open. It's quite clear, shameless piece of self-promotion here. If you read Research Professional News on Monday, you'll have seen some accounts there, a piece that I wrote that really says why we really should be focusing on open research at the moment, especially now that the UK has finally reassociated with Horizon Europe and the European Framework project programs. That there's been a lot of work in Europe around open research and support and policies and requirements relating to open research. So we are in the UK aligned with most of those, but you know, we've got work to do if we want to retain the leadership status that I think we did have at one point. So here are some of the things that the UK Reproducibility Network has been doing with others around open research. You'll recognise, I think, this graphic, which just sets out what UNESCO thinks open research, open science, as they call it, is. And there are things that might be familiar there in the top green quadrant: open access, open data, and so on. And those are mainly the things that I'm going to talk about today, in fact. But there are many, well, 3 other aspects of open science that UNESCO identifies: infrastructures, engagement with societal actors, and dialogue with other knowledge systems, which I think are increasingly important. And I do want to highlight work that our very own Kirsty Merritt here has been doing to lead the development of a guide for institutions who want to implement the whole of that open science recommendation by UNESCO. And that guide is being released at the UNESCO General Assembly this week. So that's really exciting news, and I didn't want to pass by an opportunity to mention that work that Kirsty's been leading. UKRN is also running an open research program, providing national training, reform of recruitment, promotion, and appraisal of staff. 43 institutions just joined that, sharing institutional practice and developing some meta-research and some indicators for institutions. We are just also starting a project on how institutions have managed to implement what they've committed to under what's called the Open Research Data Concordat, which was a national sector agreement back in 2016 that set out some of the things that universities and funders and researchers should be doing to make sure that they were supporting and enabling open research data. UKRN has also provided a range of resources, primers, which I'm going to go on to talk about some of these. So I'm going to talk about some in particular topic areas, some general topic areas like open access and preprints and pre-registration. But we have got quite a range of primers now, and that's growing all the time. So we've got primers on open source hardware, one coming on participation in research, public participation, on another one's just coming on using Wikimedia for open research. So quite a wide range of resources there available on the UKRN site. What I'm actually here mainly wanting to focus on today is this, which is something that we've just released this week. Some of this material has been available prior to it, but we've now got a complete set, and it's that what I'm most excited about, that we now have a complete set of briefing and training materials on research data sharing, on open access, on preprints, on pre-registration, and for open software and code. And for each of those topics, we have an animation, we have a video, we have a primer, and we have some training materials. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those things are, because my guess is the fact that you've joined this session today is that you're interested in open research and might want to use these resources, both yourselves, but also to share them with others, your peers in your departments and elsewhere, to spread the word about how and why open research is a good way of doing research. So I hope these resources will be useful to you. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the animations and the videos. So these were developed mainly by my colleague Jackie Thompson. I'm very grateful to Jackie for all the work that she's done on this. It's a set of, the animations are intended to be sort of 2 or 3 minute introductions to the topic, and then the videos are around 10 minutes each, and just setting out in each case accounts from researchers as to how and why they do this thing, how and why they preprint, how and why they share their data from a variety of different disciplinary perspectives. And these were developed in part with funding from UKRI, from the research councils, so I'd like to acknowledge that as well. What I'd like to do now actually is to show you one of each, just to, well, give me a break, but also because that's probably more interesting for you than listening to me. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be an animation.
Research these days is increasingly digital. Many disciplines are moving from more manual practices or point-and-click software to methods and analyses that involve writing or adapting code. Researchers might write or use code at many points in their workflow, to run experiments, simulations, or models, to clean or analyze their data, or to present their findings in graphs, figures, and papers. But when sharing their research, many researchers often leave the code out, as they may not know how to share it, or they may not think of their code as worth sharing. Instead, researchers are used to simply describing the analyses, models, or processes they used the code for, or presenting only the outputs it created. But actually, sharing the code itself is the most accurate and complete way to show how the research was actually done. It preserves all the small details. That makes code an integral part of research. Code that is made freely available to others is called open code or open source software. The authors will assign it an open source license so others can legally reuse it, and it should include documentation and metadata to help others use it properly, such as how to install it or comments in the code to explain how it works. However, it doesn't have to be perfect. The first step is simply to share it. There are a lot of benefits to sharing code. When others want to read and understand your research, or maybe even replicate or build off it, it is much easier for both them and you when all the code underlying it is openly available, ideally in one place. Others can see exactly what the code does or doesn't do. They can fix any problems and improve functionality by going straight to the source, and they can build upon your research without having to recreate it from scratch. This gives your work more impact. Open code also makes the transition much smoother if you or your collaborators leave a project and want to hand it over to someone else. Funders are increasingly seeing the value of sharing code and software, which means they are increasingly rewarding or even sometimes requiring it. There is a huge community of sharing code and software online, including tools, networks, and support. It can be a big benefit as a researcher to access this. Often, researchers don't have formal education in programming, so might worry that their code is too messy or inelegant to share. But many others are in this same boat. Sharing messy code is better than sharing none, and you can take small steps to learn how to write cleaner, more reproducible code. Preparing code for sharing does take time, but it also improves the readability and findability of your code, which your future self may appreciate. So don't hesitate. You can start small, and it's okay to make errors. Code is an integral part of research output, and it's important to share. To learn more, check out our UKRN primer on open code and software.
So I hope that's an insight into sort of what the resource is and that it might be useful to you. That's the animation. Welcome any thoughts on that. But the next thing that I'd like to show you, that's intended to sort of be an introduction, I guess, for those who might just want to get a flavor of what the topic is, in this case, what it means for sharing an open code around and research. But then what might happen is that a researcher might feel, well, yes, that sounds interesting. That sounds something that I'd like to know some more about, but I want to hear from some researchers, in particular, some real researchers about what the experiences are of this topic, sharing code, or indeed sharing data. So we've got a set of videos that give those sorts of accounts. So I'm going to share one of those now.
Pre-registration is the practice of documenting your research plan and depositing it in a read-only public repository. You can go on and then do your research, write it up in a standard kind of manuscript, a standard research article, and submit it to a journal the traditional way.
As well as pre-registration, there are also registered reports. They both allow you to set your analysis plans before you start, which is really important. Pre-registration really tells you about the analysis you're going to do, but doesn't guarantee publication necessarily, whereas a registered report guarantees publication even if the findings are negative.
With registered reports, we design the research, so we don't start it yet. We design it very carefully, and the journal sends it to a few other scientists, and they agree. Or maybe they say, can you add this other experiment? And we all agree. Me and my colleague and the peers and the journals say yes. This is a sufficiently rigorous study. No matter what results you find, we'll publish it. And so that is entirely backwards to how it normally works.
As a particularly an early career academic, I found that pre-registration does improve your research. I became more productive. The other thing as well is actually the feel-good factor that open science brings. It's a grueling business working in academia, or it can be, or there's ugly parts to it. But open science is what you want science to be. It's rigor, it's really thinking through the question, and it's doing your best that you can do. Because it's new as well, there's so much scope to have your own fingerprint on where the field is going, but also to incorporate practices in your own way.
We did something called a project pre-mortem, and so we all sat around a table and we sort of said, okay, our massive project to look at the neural basis of DLD has just failed. And we tried to think about what we would kind of think about as reasons for those failures. So we were really honest, and we said, like, perhaps we didn't recruit enough people. And one thing that just came up is, like, perhaps we didn't find anything. Now, this is a really bad thing. Like in science, finding something shouldn't be the reason you set out to do it. But equally, I mean, at the end of this really large project where we were going to be putting in lots of money, lots of time, careers of younger people at stake, that probably wasn't going to be ideal for us. So we thought about a registered report as one of the solutions to this, because we could say, actually, we did everything in our power to do this well, and we wanted to try and find differences in these specific areas, and we have enough power to do so. So I guess part of that project pre-mortem kind of led to the registered report.
One thing we found really useful about pre-registration is when we came to peer review of a paper, we had questions from the reviewers about whether or not we genuinely had an a priori hypothesis, and it was very easy to convince them we did. We could go back to our framework and show them our pre-registered analysis plans, and that made the process an awful lot easier.
Woo!
La grosse avalanche. Énormissime.
There are a number of issues with the current way scientific publishing works that I think registered reports can help alleviate or can address. One of them is the publication bias against negative results or things that are deemed to not be sexy enough for publication.
Right now, if you look at all journal articles, so all published science, 99% of it finds an effect. So you say chocolate affects your lifespan. Bacon makes you die more quickly. You know, taking this drug works very well. We almost never publish, we're never allowed to publish studies that just say, it didn't work. We tried these 8 things, there was no difference. We tried these drugs to prevent depression, it didn't prevent depression.
Pre-registration is really useful to help publish all our results. So I work in the field of human brain stimulation, where we try and take techniques from the lab into patients. And one of the problems with that is there's been a huge publication bias for positive results that have not translated into clinical gains. One of the things we can really improve on with pre-registered studies and registered reports is the agreement to publish the findings either way. And that's really important because actually it tells us what works, but really critically what doesn't work. So we don't waste weeks, months and years replicating work that just doesn't replicate.
One of the things we show in our paper is that we weren't able to kind of find those results we registered. So the hypothesis that we put forward, the data that we got didn't really support them. So I think it's really important to publish null findings that brain activity for a very simple language task is exactly the same in children with language disorder as to those who aren't. That's a really interesting place to start, and it gives us a foundation to build on, so we shouldn't think that's uninteresting. It might not be as flashy as saying, well, we found the region of the brain that's different, but actually I think it's really solid to be able to say, okay, well, if that's okay, then what else might be different?
So when we suggest pre-registering studies to our early career researchers, it can be quite a difficult conversation. I think there's a feeling that they've come into the lab and they want to get started with the experiments, and this obviously puts a delay to that. With good planning, I don't think it needs to, and I think it helps shape the experiments if we really think through the analysis before we start it.
When you start a project, you've got so much enthusiasm to do it. It's really good then to bottle that energy and put it into writing up the protocol up front, thinking everything through, because you've got that willingness and that motive to do that. What people tend to do is they do the project and then they think about all the tricky stuff when they come to writing up, where people are just exhausted, they can't bear the sight of the project, it's been absolute torture.
Then at the end it's much quicker. So I don't spend 3 years rewriting the paper, sending it to a different journal, taking criticism, changing it again. So I think the total time is about the same, but the workload is very different.
One of the things we hear about a lot when talking about pre-registration is students in particular worrying that their ideas will be scooped. I think we worry about that probably much more than we need to. I think actually having a pre-registration does put a stamp on it as being your idea at a certain time. And if you're really worried about it, some of the pre-registration websites will allow you to keep your pre-registration private until the moment of publication. So actually you don't have to tell the world, you just have to say in advance for yourself.
Not all types of research lend themselves equally well, but certainly all hypothesis-driven, all confirmatory and comparative analysis, in my mind, should be pre-registered.
I think it's very clear and very important that we distinguish between hypothesis-led research and exploratory findings. I think they're equally important, but I think they are different things. And I think by pre-registering our results, it makes it very clear to everybody that some of these findings are important and we thought they'd happen, some of these findings might be important, we weren't expecting them, and they need following up. And there's absolutely room for serendipity, and that's where the exciting science happens, and that can still absolutely happen with pre-registration.
It is a big culture change, so you might not get a lot of publicity because you did a study and found it didn't have any effect. So I think you need that support to prove it's better for science to work in this more rigorous way. So my main advice would be to find peers who agree with you that this is a better method, work together, and basically you have a job of convincing the higher ups, your boss's boss, that it's better to spend your time this way, it's better to do research this way.
I think the current culture of science for rewarding very high impact publications that are, quite often not replicable isn't sustainable, and I think the funders are realising that. So I think we do need to move to a culture where we are open and transparent about what we're doing. But I think we need to do things to encourage people to do this as well. And increasingly, certainly at Oxford, there are awards and prizes for people who are really making strides in this.
So I won a prize for my registered report from the British Psychological Society, which is really wonderful. Like I don't think I would have won the prize if we hadn't bothered to put in that effort to kind of pre-register. So it's also really nice to see that the community is recognizing and like changing their ways.
So there you go. That's what a video looks like, including a Sorry, I was distracted there by yet another advert on YouTube. There's a lesson there about using free platforms. So that's what a video looks like. Some researchers talking a little bit about pre-registration and about the pros and cons, if you like, of that and the challenges of that. So I hope those videos will be useful for you. Talking at the end there about the importance of recognition and prizes, of course. I hope you tune in tomorrow for the prize session as part of GW4 Open Research Week. So those animations and those videos in those 4 topics. There's a question, so let me come to the question straight away. Except I can't see it anymore. So, Zosha, can you?
That was a raised hand from Junjie Shen. I can unmute you if you have a question, or you are welcome to put it in the chat or in the Q&A. Both of those should be open to you.
Oh, sorry, that's a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, no problem then. Thank you.
All right, not to worry. Thank you. So, as I say, we've got the animations, we've got the videos, and those are intended to be really useful resources for you to sort of explain a little bit about different aspects of open research. We've also got primers, though, and training materials, and I'd like to say a little bit about both of those. So the primers, I guess if you're interested, or the person you're talking to is interested, then there's an opportunity to take the next step and to look at a primer, which is a written document, and here's one on research data sharing. So it talks about what do we mean by research data sharing, how might I share my research data, lots and lots of links there to resources and advice and guidance and so on, and then a set of further information to follow up there. So those primers, and they're all as detailed as this really, so it's 3 or 4 pages, but really give you a great launch pad to find out further information, and of course you will find further information from your library as well. And in many cases, actually, it was library staff at various institutions that wrote these primers. So those primers is another set of resources that are available. But the final thing I wanted to highlight, and this is perhaps the newest thing that's on the UKRN website, is the training resources. And if you follow through the links in the table that I just showed you, you'll come through these training materials. And these training materials are intended to support train the trainer sessions. So this is intended to be training for people who then want to go on to deliver training themselves at their institutions. And the materials for each topic comprise these 5 things at the moment. We might add to these over time, but they comprise firstly a PowerPoint deck, which just takes you through pretty much a whole day of train the trainer session, talking about how you might design an overall workshop, how you might plan particular sessions on these topics, how you might help trainees and after the training workshop that the trainer is going to deliver, and how to be an effective trainer. So it's a balance really of pedagogy, but also topic information as well. So that in each case there's a slide deck, there's other materials such as an introductory sort of outline of what the training comprises. So if you're wanting to make the case to your head of department or head of faculty or others within an institution, maybe academic staff development people, about what is this training, what does it mean, what are the implications for your institution, then this is a sort of brief outline that you can repurpose, take the UKRN logo off it if you want to, and just reuse it in whatever way you want to. It's CC BY, so we would appreciate a link back in some form. Then there's a pre-event questionnaire that we've developed, and a post-event questionnaire that you can use. So those are all set up. You don't need to plan and develop those yourselves. I hope those would be useful if you're running training. So I'll say a little bit about what we've done and how we develop these materials and what we've done with them. So they were initially developed again by Jackie and others in 2021 with some Research Council funding. And many of those versions were delivered online, obviously, because of the pandemic. We then, at the back end of last year, started revising those versions, both with UKRN and with experts across the GW4 institutions. And we got agreement with the GW4 institutions to support their trainers in each of the 4 institutions doing training in each of those 5 topics, which is very exciting. We ran that training earlier this year. And the intention then was for the people who came on those training sessions to go back to their institutions over the course of 2023 and into 2024 and deliver that training to their peers, to others at those institutions. And so what we're in the business of doing really here is to build institutional capacity and make this a sustainable thing. So the final sort of thing that we've done with this group of trainers now is we've held reviews of practice. So we've brought them all back together sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 months after the initial sessions, just to reflect on how's it gone? Have you managed to deliver the training that you were hoping to do? Have you worked together on that? Have you shared materials? What lessons might be learned? And trying in a way to build a community of practice across the GW4 institutions. And our next step is really to expand on that. You'll remember at the start of this session that I was talking about the UKRN Open Research Programme, and there's a large train-the-trainer element of that, and that's nationwide, and we're building a community of practice, of a community of trainers as a part of that. We very much hope that the training that we've done and the group of trainers that we've worked with across the GW4 institutions will merge into this wider community of trainers, so that we're able to support the transition to open research more effectively across the whole of the country. So I'm sure you've got questions on that, and I'm very happy to take those questions. I've got questions for you as well. So let me put my questions to you as well, and then maybe we can have a quick discussion in the time that's remaining. So you'll remember this table. We've got animations, we've got videos, we've got primers, those written primers, and we've got those training materials that I just talked about. And we've got those in each of these topics: data sharing, open access, preprints, pre-registration, and open software and code. So if we think about that as a table, what rows and/or columns would you want added? What's missing from this table, either in terms of new kinds of materials or new topics for these kinds of materials, and why? Why would those be the priorities for us? If we were to expand this set of materials, why would those be the ways in which we wanted to expand them? So I'll stop sharing there. I'm hoping you've got questions for me, and as I say, I've just given the question to you.
Raised hands. Stacey, you should be able to unmute now if you want to put your question directly to Neil.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can, yes.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. I wanted to kind of respond to that question, actually. I'm mindful that people learn and absorb information in different ways. And I recognize that you've got kind of rich media there, you've got written content as well. And I know you've got the training materials, but I wonder whether or not it would be helpful to go one step further to confirm almost dates of when training sessions are available. Yeah, just a thought.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Stacey. Certainly, as part of the the National Open Research Programme that I mentioned, there is a training schedule for that, which is outlined on the UKRN website. But of course, that training is available to partners in that programme, and not all of the GW4 institutions and partners. Bristol is and Cardiff is. But the training materials that I just outlined there are intended for, I guess, for institutions to pick up and use. So they would be institutional sort of training schedules for each institution to pick up and sort of do that. But it's a good point.
I think the focus that I'm trying to get at is that it's a two-way, or it's more interactive than a passive absorption of the information, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. So we want some facility for people to put up, we are running this training on this date, that sort of thing.
Or maybe, you know, some way that people can interact with it a bit more, rather than just passively taking the information. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm hoping that community of practice will be a way for that to happen. We're not quite sure what that will be yet and what kind of activities will constitute that. At the moment, we're just setting it up as an email list, but we're hoping there'll be opportunities for that kind of interactivity via that community. Thank you.
I can see Hetty, you've got your hand up as well, if you want to ask a question.
Yes, based on this morning, I'm being deliberately awkward. No, I'm not. More based on what Neil said earlier, which is that having worked with UNESCO and doing the work about the action plan for open science for institutions, is that it was very apparent this morning with Margaret Gold's talk when she's saying about looking at the citizen science part of things. And I know that we've talked about the primers, and you said that there's going to be one on kind of co-production, patient, public involvement. And I just wonder, with that in mind, whether we ought to be thinking about having that as one of the priority areas to look at, because if part of the wider culture is about that inclusivity of making sure that we've got alternate knowledge systems and societal actors engaged in the research that we do so that it gives us better quality outputs, then that's probably something that we should think about emphasizing, in addition to just we're the scientists and we're doing a thing, here it is, and also like, actually, can you give us some stuff back because we value it and your opinion and want to know what it's like from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. Margaret's talk was so good this morning. Thanks very
brilliant.
much for organising that. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Those other three quadrants of the UNESCO sort of circle, as it were, of open science are missing, absolutely missing from that table that what I've introduced today. It's a big thing to get into, though. There are people who have been working in this area and are experts of this for many years. So I think we as UK Reproducibility Network would probably want to be thinking quite carefully about what that might entail and who we might want to work with. So the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement might be one group, but there will be many others. And it will look very different in different sorts of disciplines as well, different kinds of research, sort of engagement looks very different and happens for very different reasons. So yes, but it makes me slightly nervous. Anybody else got thoughts on that?
Not seeing any hands or comments in the Q&A or chat. I guess I had a couple of thoughts, summarising from this morning's talks and other things. So the current range of primers are great, but they do seem relatively focused on the kind of STEM model of research. Which I'm sure is in some ways inevitable, given that the kind of reproducibility crisis that drove this arose from a STEM subject. But I am wondering if there's been any thought to like broadening out the scope to look at issues around qualitative research and openness there, non-traditional research outputs, say, those sorts of things which are a bit more non-standard, I suppose, in the sort of trad STEM model.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can say non-standard, can we? Yeah, no, really good question, and that prompts me to say a few things. Firstly, I need to say something about how the primers arise. So they arise from the research community. So if we have someone within the UKRN community who feels that there needs to be a primer on X, then we will work with them to create a primer on X. We don't commission them. Usually, they usually definitely come from the research community. So we would very much look forward to suggestions of the kind that you just described, Joshua, coming in and working on that. There are some humanities scholars in the videos talking a little bit about more from the digital humanities side, perhaps unsurprisingly. But yes, we are conscious, I think, at the UK Reproducibility Network of potential bias from where we came from. We have done some work on that. So, for example, last week we convened a conversation between arts practice researchers and psychology researchers about what the terms like transparency, reproducibility, and positionality might mean in those sort of two different fields of research. Just to start the conversation in lots of ways and try and get some exchange of views and perspectives between communities of researchers. And that was an incredibly rich experience, I think, for everyone involved. So, I think there's opportunities for us to do much more of that kind of work. But yeah, there is almost certainly a gap and an opportunity for us to do more in those sorts of areas.
The new comment in the chat, one from Kirsty. Kirsty, I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
By the time I started typing it, you'd finished speaking because it takes me that long. It was kind of following up. It was one of the things that I wrote down from the videos that we watched, was that there was the person that was talking about it being hypothesis versus exploratory findings. And I found that quite interesting because it's one of the things that Zosha and I have discussed when we've been talking about the Octopus platform, because to us sometimes those seem to be very STEM biased, and I couldn't think of a way of saying that those social science nerds like me don't necessarily go in with things as easily planned as this. It is that kind of exploratory finding, and that's a lot of the things that we do in arts and social sciences and humanities more broadly. So I think that idea of it being taking away that kind of STEM bias, perhaps that hypothesis, the exploratory findings rather than the hypothesis in pre-registered reports and pre-registration, is that may be the kind of the step forward for that particular area to represent the fact that we aren't all doing things in the same way, and also we might not all be doing the same kinds of outputs, that bibliodiversity of different types of outputs and what relative influence or impact they have on their particular disciplines, rather than it just being, we're going to publish in Science, we're going to publish in Nature, we're going to publish in wherever.
Yeah, that's nice, Kirsty. I like that. And of course, it's not, I guess, it depends on how you're defining these terms, but it's not only outputs, it's the process as well. So the process of doing research, which we're hoping to make more transparent, because that is the way, or one of the ways in which we can make it more rigorous and more reproducible, to expand the range of engagement and scrutiny. That process looks different in different sorts of fields, different sorts of research settings, and so on. So I think that's a really good point. I mean, another aspect of perhaps especially qualitative research, which we haven't captured yet, is sort of the qualitative research with vulnerable communities as well. So where you're exploring the sort of experience of whether it's refugee communities or whoever it is, that kind of research is incredibly challenging to make open for very, very obvious reasons. And there's been some great work from Isabella and from Colin here at the University of Bristol, which a project called Opening the Unopenable, to look at the ways in which open research might be relevant to that kind of research. We're very much hoping to publish something from that project as a UKRN working paper or something similar reasonably soon. So
I've definitely got some people we can put you in touch with from here that have done things about domestic violence and trans communities, and the flip side of that as well, which is that some people actually want to have their voices heard. So, you go full circle on it at that point, but we'll be in touch.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Kirsty. And I should mention that there is a national, or just starting actually, a national sort of special interest group within UKRN of researchers who undertake qualitative research and the ways in which open research, thinking about how they can do open research better. There's some really interesting thinking going on at Sheffield and at York and other places as well.
Also just a quick plug, we actually had Isabel and Colin speaking earlier today about that same seminar series, being open about the unopenable. So if anybody in the audience here is interested in that, the talk that they just gave will go up on YouTube and be linked to from the GW4 page probably at the end of this week, but you can already find the recordings of their full seminar series on YouTube if you just go in and search for being open about the unopenable. And yes, I would highly recommend it. It's a really fascinating series. Okay, so I think no more questions coming in on the chat or the Q&A. Did you have anything else you wanted to pose to the group, Neil?
No, that's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Welcome. Something has just come into Q&A. So this is a question, how do institutions tend to implement open science good practices? I suppose my question is how to find a nice balance between the responsibility of the PI and a top-down, this is how things should be done sort of approach.
Okay, thank you for throwing that's a very difficult question. And I don't think there's a straightforward answer to it. And I think, you know, in a sense, the two levels that you posited in the question aren't the only two levels that are involved here either. So, you know, you talked about the PI and sort of top down, which I guess you mean university management, but there are many other layers and networks in a university or other research place that we might want to think about. I mean, if we're honest, I think there has been a tendency for open research to be a little bit top down, a little bit policy driven. There have certainly been what you might call pioneer PIs, so researchers who are sufficiently well established to be PIs who have been strong advocates for open research, and that's been immensely valuable. But one of the things that we have not yet been terribly good at, I think, is broadening that from a set of pioneers to being general accepted practice within departments, schools, faculties, and so on. There's some really interesting work going on at the moment, actually, international work, looking at the ways in which we do that kind of scaling, particularly around computational reproducibility, which I know is only one slice of this, but it's nevertheless quite an interesting piece of work to see how we broaden out from sort of individual pioneers and advocates. The other thing I'd sort of mention, and this is something that I think Bristol's thinking quite hard about with respect to its own open research policies, is thinking about policies as not necessarily being a set of documents that say thou shalt, and being more a set of policies that set out, you know, this is our shared aspiration, and these are the sort of responsibilities that we each have for us to realise that shared aspiration. That was a strong message that came out of the meeting that, about sort of an international meeting around open research policies that I went to earlier this year. And I'm hopeful that that will become a general trend in the way that policies are written, that it's much less, you know, university has decided we will do X, and much more, we as a community have decided that we will do X, and this is what each of us will do in order for us collectively to reach that goal. It's a bit of a waffly answer, sorry, but it's the best one I can manage.
Okay. Nothing else in the Q&A. There's a comment from you, Kirsty, in the chat. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Well, just that, as Neil said, it's not just about the those PIs that are out there, you know, shouting, saying this is a brilliant thing to do, we're doing it for the right reasons, and senior managers kind of looking at essentially, if I'm being cynical, what do we need to do to tick the boxes to keep getting the money in? But there are networks of people across it, including the UK Reproducibility Network has got their own local network leads, and there's that kind of grassroots thing, but that tends to be very much in pockets. And then there's people like myself and Zosha who have been beating the drum for the last 10, nobody's mentioned the ref yet. There's beating the drum for the last kind of 10 years or so, trying to get people on board with it. And it's often very, very difficult for us to find the right people to speak to. We've been extraordinarily fortunate in Bristol that we had Marcus Manafo, who was one of those kind of, I used to call him our data rock star, because back in 2015 he was out there publishing data sets, but it meant that we were able to kind of take that pincer approach to get things kind of moving here. And I think we were just fortuitous, and not every institution is going to have that. And then on the other hand, if that had happened in another institution that was smaller, it might have had more traction because you're not as siloed. So it's quite difficult to get that kind of the momentum that you need across every division, professional services, across staff, across senior management. And we are personally, as librarians who've been beating this drum for a long time, hoping that when we get more emphasis on that kind of environment statement with the ref, then it will start to broaden what we can do and how we can have that impact on people. And we've recently spoken with our own research and enterprise people and said, well, if this is coming up, then we need to look at different ways of doing our research, because it could be up to 25% of what we get scored on in the next ref. So yes, it's difficult because we don't always have access to the people, and the people might not be listening at the time that we're beating that drum.
Okay, so I think, unless anybody else has any final comments, questions, either from the audience for Neil or vice versa. No. Then I think we shall draw this to a close. So it just remains to thank Neil. Thank you very much, Neil, for your time putting this together, for introducing us to the UKRN primers and associated materials. I will just remind everybody that the GW4 Open Research Week continues. Still got 2 more days of events, including the Open Research Prize, which is tomorrow afternoon. So I would strongly encourage people to sign up for that and attend. It'll be a showcase of some excellent open projects with open research kind of potential, and how they've realised that, and some voting and a prize giving. So yes, definitely do attend if you can. There is the link to the full schedule. And with that, I think we shall end this. Thank you very much all.